Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Emily Willingham. Emily is a journalist and scientist. Her writing focuses on neuroscience, genetics, psychology, health, and medicine, and occasionally on evolution and ecology. Today, we will speak about her latest book, Phallacy, Life Lessons from the Animal Penis. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Alan, thanks for having me here.
So next time I have a cocktail party, I'm going to have a lot of questions to ask. Hey, do you know this and that about the penis? And I'm sure I'm going to be the star of the next cocktail party as soon as we are allowed to mingle in person. I wonder if we could start with you telling us a little bit about your background. I read that you speak a little bit of Spanish as well.
Oh, yeah. Hablo un poquito español porque mi madre es profesora de español en una universidad en Texas.
Wow.
Sí.
Okay. Muchas gracias. Okay. So good. Okay. For the listeners, she speaks Spanish because her mother teaches Spanish in a university in Texas.
Sí.
Okay. So how about you? How about you have studied so many things: science, journalism, ecology. Can you tell us where did you get started?
I got started getting an English degree. Actually, I started out as a German major, and don't ask me to say anything in German because I can't remember that quite as well. But I ended up getting an English degree, and I wanted to be a journalist, but I also wanted to write about science. And then I got so interested in science, I went to graduate school in biology and earned a PhD in biology, maintained a freelance career while I was doing that. I actually had a tenure track position and was in a lab of my own, and we were studying gonads. And I did a postdoc at the University of California, San Francisco, where we studied penises, which is very intently. And yeah, so I ended up, I had to choose one or the other. So I chose writing in the end. And that's what I focus on now completely.
Okay, so I don't know how to ask this question without sounding funny, but what was your major interest in the penis?
Well, we were the lab I was in at the University of California, San Francisco. We were actually studying a condition that's called hypospadias, when little mammals develop and they have a structure called a urethra, which is where your urine comes out, right? And if the structure is going to be part of a penis, it elongates, and it usually comes out at the tip of a penis, right? And you probably may be familiar with that. That's where the urine comes out. But in some people, it doesn't end. It exits somewhere lower down. And so it comes out, instead of at the tip, it comes out somewhere lower down on the penis. So we were looking at the genetics of that and examining that and other animal models to find out what might cause it and what genes might be involved.
Okay, well, we will have many more questions about that. But first of all, how do you get then into writing books?
Well, I have always wanted to be a writer since I was about 3 or 4. I have been writing, and I do it compulsively. And obviously, I think a lot of us are probably big readers, so I read all the time as well. And it's just, I think that's just a lifelong goal of mine, was to do that. So,
Okay, well, when I go to museums, let's say anthropological museums, or in my country, Colombia, I had gone to the pre-Columbian museums. I seen statues of Native American with big penises. And I know that that is not unique to our culture. I know that in many museums, we see kind of the same thing. So I wonder what is our fascination with the penis, and to us men, the bigger the better.
I can't speak to all cultures, obviously, and I'm not an anthropologist. I'm a, that's not my field. Just from a surface take on it, and I wrote about it a little bit in the last chapter of the book, like a little bit below the surface for a couple of cultures, but it is an obvious source of fertility, right? I mean, ejaculate comes out of there, and I think people manage to connect in some sense what comes out of there and the reproduction. So I think that's part of it. It's interesting because it has varied. That interest in the size and in wanting it to be large is not universal necessarily. The Greeks kind of, for very snotty reasons, held it to be that it was preferable to kind of have a small one because that was supposed to be more genteel and less coarse than having a large one. And if you actually talk to people who have sex with people with penises, so if you talk to people who have vaginas, you learn that the size thing is maybe not that big of a deal to them, that they have other things that they want from their sex partner besides a gigantic penis. So, there are mixed attitudes about it for sure.
Yeah, I heard in some kind of literature book that it is unfair for us humans to compare ourselves in that aspect when any ass or donkey is superior to us.
So I do have a whole chapter on who has the largest penis, and it's not us. We don't even win among primates. We're in some kind of 22-way tie with like 21 other primate species for size. So yeah, the largest one is on a barnacle. There's this teeny weeny little barnacle that's got a penis that's like many, many, many times its body size.
Wow,
So
wow.
yeah, for proportion, that one wins.
Okay, so there's this fascination with men penises or male penises. Why has the vagina been left out of science writing?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, because the people who've been doing the science, who've been asking and answering the questions, have largely been people with penises up until quite recently. And so they just very much focused on those. In insects and a lot of other animals, it's just readily visible. So it's a little easier to evaluate, of course. But what was more interesting to me when I was writing this book was to discover that that wasn't the only reason. They also just kind of dismissed the vagina as being of any interest, which is not very scientific way to approach it, because as my book shows, one of the patterns we see is the more a penis has ornamentation, the more it has like scrapers and spikes and things like that on it, that indicates that there is some tension in the mating process. And so you would expect, if the penis has these features, the vagina must have something that's kind of driving selection for them. But they were like, oh, we don't need to look at vaginas. That's probably got nothing going on there. When they look, they find things. They find that, yes, there are features that seem to be kind of going back and forth between penises and vaginas in these species. And the vaginas are very interesting.
Well, and you mentioned that, for example, in the dog's vagina is the woman who decided to study or explore what's going there as opposed to a man scientist.
Yeah, in fact, she is, I believe she's from Colombia. Her name is Patricia Brennan, and she is very well known for her work in this area, but she was working in a lab in the UK, and they were dissecting ducks, and ducks are famous for their having corkscrew-like penises that emerge really ballistically, and they engage in forced copulation, meaning there's no you don't like go through a lot of intimacy things before you engage in copulation. The males are just like there, right? So, nobody checks a box and says this is okay, right? And so they were working on these ducks, and they were dissecting the vaginas out of the duck, out of these animals, and only looking at the top part of it because there was something the penis was doing in there they were interested in. Right. And she thought, why don't we look at the rest of it instead of just cutting them out? And so she did go do that. And she is actually, as far as anybody knows, the first person to bother with that. And what she has found, and she's looked at a lot of other species since then, but the ducks have this corkscrew penis. And what she found is that these vaginas kind of have the inverse corkscrew, like as though to just sort of reject the corkscrew penis from the male partner of the duck. So it was worth a look, turns out.
Okay. So at the beginning of the book, you debunk what is called the stripper study. So I wonder, first of all, if you could tell, and I did believe the stripper study. I mean, I didn't know much about it, but I heard about it and I believe its theory. So can you tell us what is the stripper story, and then how is it that you debunk it?
Yeah, I think the idea is interesting. So one of the authors on that study worked in a strip club, and he had a couple of things that he did there. One of the things is that he doled out tips. And the other thing is that he doled out tampons to the women who were working there if they needed them. And he kind of noticed a pattern that when he was doling out tampons, if he doled out tampons to a woman, she also got less in the way of tips. And so the question that arises is, well, what's going on there? Why would you get like less, fewer dollars, right? If you're on your period. But the way they went about kind of addressing it was not let's just say it wasn't very rigorous. And so, they did an online survey. A very small number of women responded to it. Some of them were on hormonal birth control. Nobody knows what their actual hormone levels were, where they were in their cycles. And the author sort of concluded that somehow they inferred that when the women were ovulating, they were going to get more tips, and if they were on their periods, they would get less. And it wasn't because, I don't know, tampons can be super uncomfortable. You can be sitting there experiencing menstrual cramps. Maybe you don't want to go thrusting your pelvis into somebody's face, right? When you probably are familiar with this, but when you're wearing a tampon and it's just, the whole thing sounds quite uncomfortable as part of that job. And so they didn't really take that into account, and instead they concluded that women were sending out, or the men were picking out subtle signals from these women in this like dark cacophonous strip club, where they also probably were altered by alcohol at the least, picking up these subtle like ovulatory cues from women when they were in the middle of their cycle, not on their periods, and tipped more, and then were not picking up these cues when the women were on their periods and tipped less. And it just, those dots are not connected even remotely in that study. It was salacious. And like I said, it's actually kind of an interesting question, but the way they tried to pursue it was not rigorous at all.
Okay. Well, let me share with you. In one of my previous life, I used to be a dance teacher. I used to be a salsa and Argentine tango teacher.
Yeah.
And one of the theories, not scientifically proven, but one of the theories is that at the time that women are ovulating, they dress more sexy, more provocative. I wonder if there is anything behind that, or if just our imagination.
Yeah, you'd have to test it. People can speculate about it, but hormones affect behavior. There's no question. And when people who make eggs are ovulating, they experience a very distinct hormonal change, right? That's what triggers ovulation, is spikes. And if the effect on behavior is that you feel sort of more confident, and if confidence is manifested socially as dressing a certain way or behaving a certain way, then sure, I could see, stepping out and feeling pretty good about yourself under the effects of a hormone spike like that. But it would need to be evaluated scientifically, right, in a rigorous way before you could say, yes, that's exactly what's going on.
Right. Okay. Another issue that I like to bring out is that it is said that we men, we cannot control ourselves. And this goes to many cultures, that if we see a sexy woman in the street, we just, I don't know, we just cannot control, and we go as far as raping women just because we cannot control ourselves. How much, what can you tell us about that?
Well, rape is a complex thing to do to somebody, and it's not something that only men do. Of course, it's a lot of things, including a power thing, right? When somebody does that, I can tell you that the vast majority of men can and do control themselves. And circumstantially, if I walk down the street with my very large partner, my husband, I do not get bothered by men. So they seem to be perfectly capable of controlling themselves under those conditions. And if I walk alone, even now in middle age, it's a different experience. It absolutely is. So of course men can control themselves, and they do it all the time. And I would say the vast majority of them do it volitionally without there having to be a large man present with a woman. So
Right.
I think it's largely an exception, honestly, when men behave in poor ways and try to exert power over somebody else that way.
Yeah, I even saw a video in YouTube. I mean, that's as far as my scientific research goes. About this was something in about women in Islamic countries, women not covering themselves, and one of the men was saying that that is an invitation for rape, and of course, that's a scandalous and it's. I even hesitate to say cultural, but I mean, that's the video that I saw.
Yeah, it's certainly not confined to countries where Islam is prominent. People do that here all the time. They're constantly blaming women who are raped for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for how they're dressed, etc. And all of that is absolute nonsense. The person who's responsible for a rape is the person who commits it. Period.
Okay, so enough about that. Okay.
A little dark, Alan.
What? Okay, so what is chapter number 4? What is the main use of the penis? Let's go to science now.
Well, so like I say in that chapter, when I taught biology, which I've done a lot, I used to teach that the penis was essentially a sperm delivery system. And, that's one of the purposes of it, certainly, but they do a lot of other things. Like lots of animals use what they use to deliver sperm, they use for other purposes as well. They fight with each other with them. They use them to deliver like gifts to a partner. Sorry, not like actual gifts, but they deliver like nutrition to a partner with them. They use them to engage in social interactions with not related to mating. And so there are lots of uses for them besides just transferring some sperm to a partner.
Okay, and there are, I mean, some funny things or some curious things. Some male loses their penis when they have intercourse, and I think some even give up the whole life when they have intercourse. So can you elaborate? It sounds frightening. I don't think I would like to be a male in one of those species, but
yeah, of course, as a human, we don't think that sounds very great, right? It doesn't sound like the optimal sort of disposition for a penis. But I should mention also some animals use their feet to deliver sperm. So, anyway, there are lots of uses for these. But in the case you're talking about, look, one example is this little octopus species. It's called the paper nautilus. It's not a nautilus and it's not made out of paper. But the male is very, very small compared to the female. And so octopuses or octopi, depending on which you prefer, they have their 8 arms, and one of those is called a hectocotylus, and that is actually used to deliver little sperm packets underneath the female, her little mantle, the thing that goes like this. And because these little octopuses, the males are so tiny and the females are quite large, she'll just eat the male. Like, she's not above just kind of eating him as a snack. And so what he'll do is kind of like sneak up there and like drop his arm off. He'll just release the arm inside of her and then swim away as fast as he can so that he doesn't get eaten. And they used to find females that had like several of these arms inside of them. And for a while, some biologists thought that these were just like parasites inside of the female instead of just like little bitty, released released octopus arms acting like penises. Yeah.
Wow. And okay. And how about the insect that just give up his life for the intercourse? Which one is that?
Well, there are a lot of animals that give gifts to a mating partner. They're called nuptial gifts, and they can be everything from a little bit of semen, actually, which has a lot of nutrition. And so they're actually sometimes a very large amount of semen that's nutritional, or they can give up their entire bodies to the mating partner, and there's nutrition in that. So there are spiders that do that. And there's one spider species in particular where the female will be busy snacking on a male she just mated with. And spiders actually have 2 places to put a penis or an intromitum, as I call it. And so she can have one male who's done that business right on the left side, and she'll just be snacking on him. And she'll let the other male come up on her right side while she's still busy eating the first one, and let that, you know, the other male like, you know, insert on the right side and, you know, put places, you know, the sperm there. So,
But
yeah.
our instinct, I guess, as species is survival and reproduction. I guess in that case, their instinct of reproduction is bigger than their survival instinct.
Yeah, these are competing interests, right? But ultimately, if you're going to win the kind of genetic Olympics where you pass on your gene variants, right, to the next generation, if that male spider has done that, his job is kind of done. He doesn't really, you know, need to do anything. Living a long time is not the same thing as being successful in evolution, right? Success in evolution is, did you pass those gene variants on? He did, so I guess he gets to be a snack now, which, if it really does give her nutrition, helps to ensure a successful reproduction, right? And so, you know, that's his contribution as a parent, I guess.
Wow. Okay. So I guess I'm just blown away by all these little details. I wonder if there's any questions that I neglected to ask you.
I don't think so. Certainly not. I mean, this has been a fun conversation, or mostly. So.
Okay. So can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you?
Sure. Yeah. The title of the book is Phallacy: Life Lessons from the Animal Penis. There are a lot of them to learn. You can find me on Twitter mostly. That's probably the easiest, at EJ Willingham, Willingham.
Emily, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was interesting.
Is it recording? No, it's supposed. Hold on.